If you were to ask a typical Christian what they thought the signs of the end times were, they'd probably give you something from the book of Matthew, chapter 24. Like, there'll be wars and rumors of wars, or all kinds of natural disasters. They might point to the book of Daniel. They might talk about the book of Revelation and try and squeeze some of the craziness that's going on today into some of the weird verses that are in that. But an awful lot of them would jump to this idea that acceptance of the LGBT community, I mean, their mere existence and the fact that they're trying to live as who they are is proof that we are currently living in the end times. But how well does that actually hold up? So I want to do 2 videos on this. The first one's going to be on the T portion of it, because the LGBT, right, gender and sexuality are 2 different things. So on this, I want to talk about transgender people first. And part of the reason for this is because one of my best friends is trans. I have known her for close to 20 years at this point, and I have seen her from pre-transition through transition into growing into the person that she is, that what was trapped inside for so long as it's emerged, and she's gotten a chance to live her life. And the last few years have been really difficult. I've really felt for her, because I've watched her go from feeling like she's relatively accepted in society to suddenly this wild backlash to the point where she feels like she might have to defend herself. And I mean, she's spent a decent number of nights crying. There's been panic attacks and anxiety over this, and it is just wildly, wildly unfair. And I really kind of want to point to the Bible, and there, because so many Christians, especially in the evangelical and the white Christian Nationalist circles, are the ones who are kind of pushing this narrative. I want to take a look at what it is that they're talking about and where it's coming from. But first, to prove my point, I want to take a little bit of a video from the Rededicate 250 that Franklin Graham spoke at. And I'm going to try and minimize how much of him we listen to, because I really don't want to listen to him as more than I need to. But so play a little bit, I'm going to skip, and then play a little bit more.
But our struggle today is to be free from the rule of sins that are weakening the foundations of our great republic. The Bible warns us about this. 2 Timothy says, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. It seems this could have been written.
Like I said, let's jump ahead a little bit here.
But there is a downward moral decline, spiraling ever deeper into the mire. Things that never would have been talked about publicly just 30 years ago. Sinful behavior that should make us blush is now celebrated and flaunted on Main Street America. America has become morally rotten, completely sick with sin. Transgenderism, same-sex marriage, opening women's locker rooms to men are just the tip of the iceberg. Why do we...
This is the verse he's pulling from, and this is important because he points out, like the very beginning, there will be terrible times in the last days. So in the last days, the end times, this is Armageddon leading to stuff. People will be lovers of themselves, money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. All right, so he goes through, these are the foundations for what is going to happen, or what is going to lead to the end times, right? And then what does he jump to immediately? Transgenderism, gay marriage, and this idea that men are going to go in women's locker rooms, okay? Which, all right, none of that was in there. And the closest thing I can think of is this idea coming from Sodom and Gomorrah that was all about homosexuality, which, if you really look into it, it wasn't. There's plenty of other videos out there about that, and that's actually not the point of this video. But these are the closest I can get. And let's jump over to this verse here. And part of the reason I'm saying this is the closest I can get is because normally what I've been doing with these videos is finding a piece of prophecy and kind of showing how it's being related to today. And I dig into the historical context of it, the contextual context, and kind of show that all of these things that are being called prophecy within the Christian church are actually not at all. And so the issue I have with transgenderism specifically with this is that it's not in the Bible. And part of the problem is that these people didn't understand gender and sexuality. And I mean, the literalists have taken this idea that the earth is only 6,000 years old because that's how it's laid out in their interpretation of the Bible. So we can't really take this idea of gender and sexuality and science and physics and any of this stuff from people who were slightly past banging rocks on each other to make their tools. But this is one of, if not the only real verse that they have to quote from to say why transgenderism is so wrong. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. By that logic, if God created the male and female and there is absolutely no variation, then the same would show up genetically and chromosomally, right? But that's not the way it is. For example, we have androgen insensitivity syndrome, and that a person has male chromosomes, so the XY chromosomes, but their body doesn't respond to testosterone. So they end up developing outwardly female genitalia, but there's no ovaries or uterus. In Sawyer syndrome, though, they still have the same XY chromosomes, so chromosomally male, but they have female genitals as well as the uterus and ovaries. So full female reproductive structure, even though chromosomally they're a male. It also goes the other way. There's the XX intersex, which a female has XX chromosomes, but they're born with genitals that either appear male or they're ambiguous. And that one's caused by an exposure to excess male hormones in the womb. So this kind of breaks down that discussion, right? That God didn't quite make things quite as cut and dry as they'd like to claim. And if we take the idea of as above, so below, if within our physical makeup in our bodies that there is some variation, the idea that a spiritual being putting spirits into us, that there's going to be some variation in there too. And that's why the Native Americans have this idea of the two-spirit people. They're actually considered to be closer to God, because if God is this androgynous being that contains both masculine and feminine energies, then if the human body expresses masculine and feminine energies too, then that makes them closer to God. So in other religions, this wasn't an error. It was actually something to be revered. But the Abrahamic religions have this performative and toxic view of masculinity. And unfortunately, I think it just comes from where their religion came from. It was born in a time of violence, in a place of violence. And we can look through the rise of Judaism, through the rise of Christianity, and we can see that there were different occupations. There was always something awful going on. So these traumatized minds, because these people would have suffered enormous trauma, they would have all been decently broken according to today's standards. And we're taking their words from a lack of scientific, psychological, sociological, like basically you name it. They didn't really understand the world as we do today, but we're taking their word for the way things are supposed to be. So we also come to this idea of what's natural. Right? Transgenderism occurs at a roughly 1% rate within humanity, at least as things stand right now. If that's our measure for what makes something natural, then that means humans in and of themselves are not natural. We only make up about 0.01% of the biomass on this planet. That means that transgenderism shows up at 100 times higher rate within humanity than we show up on this planet by mass. And we can consider it in the form of even the atoms that make up our body. Only helium and hydrogen exist in our solar system at rates greater than 1%. Helium and hydrogen make up so much of the mass of our solar system that everything else is much, much lower. We being carbon-based life forms, our carbon is only about 0.3% of the mass of this solar system. So by that definition, if we extend the same logic that 1% is what determines if something's natural, all around, humans are not natural beings to begin with then. So this idea of what's natural is kind of silly anyway, right? Like if it exists within nature, there's a specific amount or there's a certain amount of variation in things. It exists, therefore it is part of nature. So that's just a silly argument in and of itself. Unfortunately, these ideas are getting used to hurt trans people who have already transitioned, and it's also being used to keep kids from reaching gender-affirming care. Now, this was a topic I didn't really know too much about until I looked into it specifically for this, but it is amazing the idea of what keeping gender-affirming care away from people actually means. If we were to think of it in like cis heterosexual male and female, let's say a woman suffers an injury and damages one of her breasts, and there's reconstructive surgery, right? So a boob job to reconstruct something would be considered gender affirming care. Viagra could be considered gender affirming care because that is fixing something within the male body to allow a male action to happen again. So all of these little things that we kind of take for granted and we don't even think about, they are allowing us to perform roles within our gender. But we're not even talking about, with kids, something quote unquote invasive like that. Literally, this gender affirming care could just be psychological help. It could be counseling. It could be allowing somebody to feel safe within a space and having somebody to talk to about these feelings that there's something quote unquote wrong within them. That they need to be able to get these things out and sort out what they're thinking and feeling. And by stopping people from getting even basic psychological care, we can do things like cause suicide rates and self-harm to go through the roof, overall leading to a less healthy society. There's also the fact that these puberty blockers that people are worried about. There's a review published in Child and Adolescent Mental Health. They found that the puberty blockers are completely reversible. So even this long-term damage that we're worried about is, when it comes down to it, a false concern. This is just something that we are just trying to let kids live comfortable with who they are, and to keep people from the care that they need or from having acceptance within society is just an act of sheer cruelty. It doesn't make you a more godly person to keep kids from these things. It just makes you a bigoted asshole. So at the end of all of this, like I said in my other videos, like I've gone through prophecies, these so-called prophecies, and related them to times then and times now and tried to make things in context. I have nothing to do that with, because when it comes down to it, the people who wrote these books thousands of years ago didn't understand it. And all that this is nowadays is bigotry. So the Bible doesn't have anything in it. And so this idea that, as Franklin Graham said, the signs of the end times are the transgenderism and same-sex marriage and men walking into women's locker rooms is the sign of the end, that's insanity. So that's about all I can say on that. Anyway, thank you if you've made it this far. Please like and subscribe. Like I said, there's a video coming talking about the LGBT portion of it. Just, getting into the sexuality portion after the gender. So again, thank you, and hope to see you on the next one. Bye.